So we close out this series looking at thriving in Babylon. How do we have faith? How do we live in a culture that's at odds with our faith? Not just survive, but literally thrive in life. I hope that this series has helped you glean a little bit of insight about that. Daniel's suffering really is what prepared him for Babylon, but it was his hope, it was his humility and his wisdom that enabled him to thrive in Babylon. In the worst of circumstances, but he was able to literally come out on top, thriving in Babylon. Daniel had great wisdom, and out of that wisdom came perspective. So today, what we're going to look at is those two very things, wisdom and perspective, and how they play a part in our lives today. I came across this diary entry of Matthew Henry. If you haven't heard of Matthew Henry, he was a biblical commentator in the late 1600s. And this was a diary entry that he had written after he had been robbed. He said this: "Let me be thankful. First, because he never robbed me before. Second, because although he took my purse, he didn't take my life. Third, because although he had all I possessed, it wasn't much. Fourth, because it was I who was robbed, not I who robbed." Have you ever been able to take a situation like that and just overlook all of the negative and just simply find the positive in a situation? He was robbed, but he didn't say one negative thing. He only chose to focus on the things that he could give praise to God for, that he could be thankful for. I think his perspective played a lot about that. It was what he chose to focus on. A few weeks ago, I told you about the computer technology world that was kind of big when computers first came out. It was called GIGO. Garbage in, garbage out. Pretty much the computer software people were saying, if you're going to put trash in your software, that's exactly what you're going to get out. But it's the same way for us today spiritually. The things that we put into our lives are the things that are going to come out. How does that affect our perspective in life? Daniel's wisdom was first rooted in the fear of God. First and foremost, his wisdom came out of his fear for God. Daniel and his friends feared God more than anything. They feared God more than the fiery furnace that they faced. They feared God more than the lion's den and anything else that the Babylonians could throw at them. I really, when I was thinking about this, this came to my mind, was Matthew 10:28. I think we forget about this quite a bit. But Jesus said, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell." Who do you fear more? Who do we fear more? Do we fear mere humans and what they can do to us? Or do we fear God who has control of all things? one of the key factors for Daniel and his wisdom was that he knew the difference between sin and the things he found personally offensive and distasteful. He knew the difference. He was able to look and he was able to see the difference between what was truly sin and what we or he viewed as offensive. You see, we tend to confuse what we don't like and what God forbids. We're really good at that. You see, for Daniel, he had this kind of mindset. You can call me whatever you want. I mean, they took his name that was meant to honor God, and they gave him a name that was meant to honor a false god. But he didn't fight it. He didn't refuse to use it. Even in his own writing of telling the story, if you look back, he actually refers to himself as the name that he was given by the Babylonians. You see, because he realized that though it was offensive to him, he realized that there was no direct biblical command that said you had to have a God-honoring name. Nowhere in the Bible does it say your name has to be a name that in its translation and what it means honors God. So Daniel said, it's not worth arguing about. It's not worth fighting about. It's not a sin, therefore, I'll let it go. The second thing Daniel said was, you can teach me whatever you want. You can teach me whatever you want. While God forbids us to practice astrology and the occults, the scriptures say nothing about what we can study. Scriptures say nothing about what we can study. So rather than putting his foot down and saying and refusing to take the classes that he had to prepare him to be a servant to King Nebuchadnezzar, he took the classes. And he didn't sit in the back row and roll his eyes and throw out his comments that he didn't like what he was being taught. No, he sat in the front row, he worked as hard as he could, and he finished at the top of his class. In doing so, gave him the platform and the credibility that enabled him to go before kings and influence them. Because he was willing to put aside and say, I'm willing to put up with some things that are offensive to me in order to be able to show them who God is. The third thing is going to be a little difficult for you. Because this one is something that we really struggle with. Daniel said, do what you please. If you haven't noticed, the world does this already. But we have a problem with it. Because it's not what we're supposed to do. It's not how we're supposed to act. It's not the behavior that we're supposed to have as a God-fearing human being. Daniel had wisdom to understand that godless people live godless lives. Godless people live godless lives. He never forced his righteous lifestyles on other people. And even when he rose to the highest positions of power, he never imposed his beliefs in God on the people around him. He never said, you have to do this. This is how you have to live. This is what you're supposed to do. Because you see, he expected from the people that lived godless lives, he expected them to do one thing. Live godless lives. You see, we can't control the behaviors that people have that we don't like. because they don't know God. They may not know what they're doing. They may know what they're doing, but still choose to live apart from God. But that's their choice. Taking a stand on something without having a relationship with a person or influence in their life will only do one thing, and that's push them farther away from God. You see, we lack perspective. It literally comes down to we lack perspective. So let's look at this story of Daniel in Daniel chapter 6. So Daniel, again, sets himself apart. We're not there yet. Yeah, not there yet, Jim. Daniel sets himself apart as being one of the brightest, most intelligent people, most faithful people in his field. And so when King Darius becomes the new king of Babylon, he appoints 120 satraps to rule in the kingdom. These satraps would have been similar to our governors today. And over those 120 satraps, he appointed 3 individuals as administrators. So these would have literally been like presidents over the governors. And Daniel just happened to be one of those administrators that were appointed over the satraps. But Daniel exceeded even that, and the king looked at him and said, "You're far better. You far exceed them. I trust you more than I do them. And so I'm going to put you in second in command." So there was King Darius, and then there was the Hebrew, Daniel. So as you can imagine, the other people under him did not like the fact that this outsider, this Hebrew, this Israelite, was made second in command of Babylon. And so they decided they were going to find charges to put against Daniel. But I love this part. It says that they could find nothing wrong with how he ran his government affairs. Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be cool if we could find one politician where we could go through and say, "You're good"? You know, I honestly believe there's one out there. I don't know where. I don't, because I don't know all of them, so I can't. I seriously hope there are some. But he was found to conduct all of his government affairs, and there's nothing they could find. It says that there was no corruption or negligence found in him, but he was found to be trustworthy. This wasn't even his country. These weren't his people. But yet he was faithful. He loved them, and he lived his life, and he worked, and he operated in a way that honored his God, even in a godless culture. He honored God first. The administrators knew that the only way that they could find a way to bring charges against Daniel was if it had to do with his God. But listen and understand this. It's not how we would look at people today to find things that they've done wrong in terms of their God. Because today, we would look for the things that you didn't do. Wouldn't we? Because that's our criteria. We look at people and we have this checklist of, okay, they call themselves a Christian. So do they go to church? Sometimes. Check. Do they read their Bible once a year? Check. Do they, so we have this criteria of list that we have, and if they meet all this criteria, they're good. But see, it was actually the opposite with Daniel. They were trying to find him being faithful. They knew that all they had to do was wait, because they knew that Daniel was not going to dishonor his God. He was going to be faithful to his God no matter what. And so all they knew is they had to sit back and wait, and he would dig his own grave. So they tricked King Darius into making this law, or passing this edict that said that for 30 days no one could pray to anyone, no God or nothing, except King Darius. And of course, this made King Darius, feel great. Of course, I don't want anyone to pray to anybody but me. So he passes this law. This isn't up there, Jim. Verse 10. Daniel hears about the law that's just been passed. Listen to how he reacts. It says, "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." He went home and did exactly what the law said you can't do. You see, us in our humanness, we would have heard, okay, we cannot pray, we can't get caught, so what we're going to do is, Daniel could have stayed downstairs on his couch and he could have prayed and never been caught. That was one option. But here's the second thing we would do as faithful Christians, is we would go up to the rooftop and we would proclaim in the loudest voice possible again and say how wrong and offensive it is for someone else to tell us who we could and could not pray to. We would have made sure that everyone around us knew that we were going to take a stand and that we were going to pray no matter what. What does he do? He really does nothing. It says that he goes and he prays just as he had done before. This was his regular pattern. He didn't break his pattern. He didn't do nothing. He did exactly what he had always done. He bowed before his king, his one true king, and he prayed for guidance. He prayed for help. The administrators had him. So they go to King Darius. They tell him about what had happened and that they had caught him. So they bring charges against Daniel. So Daniel went and he got the best defense attorney money could buy. And he pled not guilty. Isn't this what we do? Isn't this exactly what we do? Even if we're guilty of something, we'll go and we'll get an attorney. And we'll take our attorney's advice, because all good attorneys will tell you, plead not guilty. But wait a second. I am guilty. He was guilty. He knew what the punishment was. The punishment would be that if you pray to any other person or God other than King Darius, you would be thrown into the lion's den. The end of his life, he knew what the result would be if he did the offense. But he still chose to pray to his God. Therefore, he was willing to pay the punishment because, again, he feared God more than anything else anyone could do to him. Verse 14. It says, when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Verse 15, he couldn't save him. 16, the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At first light of dawn, the king got up and he hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called out to Daniel in an anguished voice. Do you hear a lot of the problem going on there? This was a godless king. This was a Hebrew. This was a person that had been taken into captivity, into slavery, was forced to become a Babylonian, but everybody knew that Daniel was only faithful to one person, and that was his God. But yet the king felt anguish, felt heartache, felt pain for Daniel. He didn't want Daniel to be killed. He didn't want Daniel, even though he was guilty, he did not want Daniel to die. Why? Why? Because of Daniel. Because of how he lived his life. He put God first in every situation. But here's the second thing. He honored his king. He served his king exactly the way God would want him to serve his king. He didn't sin when he did it, though. But he didn't cram it down the king's throat that he was a sinner. See, Daniel had perspective. You see, we tend to think that the biggest issue in a person's life is their garbage mouth and their godless lifestyle. But you see, that's not the biggest issue in their life. Their biggest issue in their life is that they don't know Jesus Christ. But when we care more about the little nitpicky things that are offensive to us, all we do is push people away from Jesus. I'll be honest with you. It's hard sometimes to stand there and listen to people talk, and every other word's a cuss word. It's difficult. But I've come to the conclusion that I have one rule. I will not call a person out, and the only way I call them out is say, please watch your language if my kids are around. That's the only time I will call someone out on it. Because I'm not going to let a four-letter word get in the way of me being able to have an influence and an impact in someone's life, to be able to show them and teach them and show them who God is. Because that's more important than the words that come out of their mouth that are offensive to me. You see, there's this word called tolerance. Tolerance literally means granting people the right to be wrong. Granting people the right to be wrong. It's okay if you're wrong. But of all people, people who follow Jesus Christ should be the best at this. We should be the most tolerant people around. Unfortunately, the word tolerance has lost its true meaning. It's been redefined in a way. It no longer means granting others the right to be wrong. It now means nobody is wrong. It now means to be tolerant of somebody means that whatever a person chooses to do for themselves, however they choose to act, is right because they're the ones choosing it. So no matter what actions or behaviors you choose to do, you're right because I don't have the right to tell you it's wrong. Attack of the fly there. So everybody's right. Nobody's wrong. But the second somebody stands up and says that you're wrong, that you're morally wrong for doing something, they're instantaneously given the title as an intolerant bigot. And ironically, they become the one group nobody wants to be tolerant of. Sound familiar? So Daniel loved his king, but he honored his God. Let's see what effect that Daniel had on this king. We've talked about what the effect that he had on King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar ends up saying and proclaiming that Daniel's God is the one true God. And he commanded that all people honor Daniel's God. So let's see the effect that Daniel has on King Darius. Now you can show. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth. May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Listen, that never happens the second Daniel stands up and says, King, you can't rule like that. That's not right. You can't do that. It's over. He's lost all chance of being heard by King Darius. You see, the thing is, God could have saved Daniel from the lions just as he did. And King Darius never changed his mind. The only way that King Darius changes his mind is because of how Daniel lived and treated the king. You see, the only way that we will transform a community is if we stop looking at the offensive things that people are doing and love them anyway. Love them enough to gain their trust. Love them enough to want them to be around you. Because they're not going to feel judged. They're not going to be put down. They're not going to be found offensive to you. But they want to be around you. So in this series, we've looked at the main idea of how do we live in a godless culture that's at odds with our faith. The answer lies within the very question. Faith. Faith. How do we live in a godless culture that's at odds with our faith? We live by faith. We put God first in every situation. You see, I truly believe that there's a line. There's a line, and it's called sin. And God says we are not to cross that line. Because the second we cross it, we've sinned. God gives us the ability to do everything but sin. Because see, this back here, none of it's sin. It's only sin once you cross the line into that act. People may not like some of the things that are done. I just heard this a couple months ago, and I love it, and some of you aren't going to like this, but that's okay because it's good. There's a church in Oklahoma, a really large church, and they started doing what's called church online. And if you're familiar with Google, Google has these things called AdWords. And you can buy these AdWords, so whenever someone types in the search engine in Google, whenever they type in these AdWords, your website pops up. And so this church is sitting down one day and they said, how do we get the word out? How do we reach unchurched people online? And so they're thinking, okay, well, AdWords, we'll do AdWords. And so they sit down, they start writing out all these church words. And they're like, wait a second, we're going to get church people who are looking for a church if we put churchy words. And so what's every man looking for online? What are they searching for? Naked women. So guess what AdWords they bought? Naked ladies. Boobs. Those are the AdWords they bought. So guess what? You type that in the search engine, up pops, try Life Church online. Some people may find that offensive, but have they sinned? Were they looking at the websites? No. They were simply trying to reach the people who were. And God says yes. I think it's like 250,000 people a week log in online to watch church online at this church. And they have found that 75,000 people or more of those people come from those AdWords. They actually stop looking at what they're looking for and they check out church online. That's huge. That's what God calls us to be. To love people despite their offensive nature. I came across this video this week and I wanted you to hear it so that you know that you're not the only church that's getting this kind of stuff this year. This was a snippet from a message from Andy Stanley earlier this month. So check this out.
Now, real quick. I want to say something to a couple groups, all right? First, I want to say something to all of you who are 45 years old and older. You don't have to raise your hand, okay? 45 and older. Look up here. Many of you have grown weary and you've lost heart. And the reason is because you have fixed your eyes on a political system. You have fixed your eyes on a political leader. You have fixed your eyes on the good old days. You fixed your eyes on the economy. And you are growing weary and you need to knock it off. And I'll tell you why. Because you are scaring the children. You are. Now look up here, look. The generation that's coming along behind us are going to take their cue from us. And here's the cue we're giving them. Oh my goodness, if we don't get the right person elected in office, it's the end of the world. If we don't fix the economy, it's the end of the world. If we don't have religious freedom like my mama and my grandmama had religious freedom, it's the end of the world. Oh my goodness, if we don't get the right laws passed, if we don't have the right policies, it's all coming unraveled. Nothing could be further from the truth. Look up here. Government matters, policies matter, but neither of those matter as much as men and women who understand this word. Faith, Confidence that God keeps his promises and that nothing can thwart the plans of God. We know this from the Old Testament. We know this from the New Testament. We know this because the most powerful person in Judea, Pilate, looked at Jesus and said, what is truth? Crucify him. Game over. It's done. Let's move on. And the only reason you know who Pilate is, the only reason you know who Pilate is because you know the story of Jesus. Pilate, the governor, becomes a footnote in the story of Jesus. In fact, most of the first century people you know about because they're part of the story of Jesus. We have nothing to fear. So all of you people over 45, knock it off. You need to model for the next generation that God is in control. God can be trusted. Get involved in the political system. Get involved in culture. Get involved in your society. But you never fix your eyes there. You fix your eyes on Jesus.
I don't think that just goes for people 45 and older. I think that goes for all of us. Because we do this very thing, don't we? We think that one person in office is going to change the world, but it's not going to happen. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're Democrat. I don't care if you're independent. Guess what? None of you have the answer by yourself. Republicans will not change the world. You can send me an email later. Democrats will not change the world. Independents will not change the world. It will be changed because of people who are faithful to Jesus Christ. I'll close with this. This is what Paul says in Ephesians 5. It says, be very careful then how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms and hymns and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. I leave you with this. Sing and make music from your heart to Jesus Christ.